Hey folks, it's Denise Howell here, and coming up on This Week in Law, we're going to take a trip to Europe. Yes, indeed. Come along virtually with us. We have Jeff Jarvis and Trevor Timm. We're going to talk about the new proposed EU privacy directives, spy tech and authoritarian governments, and lawsuits against Netflix, Facebook, and potentially AT&T. Next up on This Week in Law.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for This Week in Law is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is TWiL, This Week in Law with Denise Howell. Episode 149, recorded February 17, 2012. Limited, unlimited. This episode of This Week in Law is brought to you by Netflix. Watch thousands of TV episodes and movies on your PC, Mac, iPad, iPhone, or TV instantly. All streamed directly to you, saving you time, money, and hassle. For your free 30-day trial, go to netflix.com/twit. Hey folks, Denise Howell here, and you've tuned in for This Week in Law. I am so excited for this week because we're going to take a little trip to Europe. We've got President's Week coming up next week, so we thought a little travel might be in order. And my traveling companions for the day are Jeff Jarvis from our very own This Week in Google and from Buzz Machine. Hi, Jeff.
Hey there, Denise. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful to see you. I'm so excited to do this show and to finally unleash you to run free on the proposed EU privacy
Watch out,
directives.
Europe.
We've got Europe in our sights. I would tweet that we were out to destroy Europe, but I'm worried that someone might detain me.
European friends, yes.
Exactly. Also joining us from EFF is Trevor Timm. Hi, Trevor.
Hey, how's it going?
Great to see you again. And you've just come back from Europe, right?
I have. I was actually testifying before European Parliament last week.
Wonderful. Well, we want to hear all about that. Let's get right into it about these proposed EU privacy directives, which are a proposed revision to regulations that have been in place in the EU since 1995. So sort of pre-internet era regulations that the EU would like to, so they say, bring into conformity with all of the technology and usage realities that have come into play since then. But they have a host of very scary ramifications globally for businesses that process people's data. And Jeff, you've brought it up a couple of times on This Week in Google, and I'd love for you to go a little deeper on that now with us and let us know what your concerns about these proposed new regulations are.
And I've gone through, all 100 pages of the regs and such, and I'm going to write a more detailed post coming up. The basic explanation here, I think, is that Viviane Reding, who's the vice president of the EC and head of justice for it, has proposed these regulations, and she has 4 essential pillars, which is probably the best way to structure the discussion as well. One is, and one I pretty much agree with, is transparency. And who could argue with that? The more transparency we have about what's done with our data, the more access we have to our own data, the more ability we have to correct it. Part of that transparency is also the requirement that the data be portable. And on a level of principle, I certainly like that, though I'm not sure that it's government's role to demand that Facebook let loose of our data. I think Facebook, as a good business principle, should, but that's a different question. That's the first pillar, is transparency. The second is the right to be forgotten. And that sounds great, but it gets complicated very quickly because once I have put data somewhere and another party interacts with it, well, who owns it? And the problem becomes very quickly that there's a possible impingement upon free speech here. If I tell you to erase something about me, then are you allowed to talk about me? And so at various levels, there are carve-outs in the regulations for history, research, and journalism, but they're very nonspecific in general, and each country would have different ones. So I've got an issue there. The third pillar is privacy by default. Also sounds good politically. Oh, of course, everything should be private by default, but if you think about it pretty quickly, I'm not sure I want to live in a society that presumes that everything should be antisocial, should be private, should be locked up. If privacy by default were the law of the land, then I argue that Twitter and Flickr couldn't exist because they are necessarily public by default. And the fourth pillar is that European citizens' data that's processed anywhere in the world must be held under European rules. Now, again, they're going to have nice rules for securing your data, including needs for 24-hour notification of any breaches, and that's all fine. But the problem here architecturally is that if we grant the EU this right to set a standard worldwide, then we could also grant China and Iran, and we end up with a high watermark of regulation and a low watermark of freedom. And so finally, my issue here, and this is, under the guise now of privacy, but also under the guise of piracy with SOPA and PIPA and ACTA, and under the guise of decency and regulations that are trying to go into effect in Canada and Australia, and other regulations of security with various U.S. regulations. All these become attempts to regulate the internet and to regulate the technology over the behavior. And the problem is that if you regulate the technology to get rid of one behavior, you get rid of other behaviors, including the ones we want and the freedoms we have. And so a friend of mine in Europe called the EU regulations super SOPA, and I tend to agree with that. So that's my quick summary of my issues.
All right. I appreciate that. Trevor, this kind of reminds me, Europe seems to be trying to put itself into the role that California has been in for the United States for some time, because California traditionally has had the most restrictive privacy regulations of any state in the United States. And what that means as a practical matter is that other states have to comply with California's regulations in order to be able to do business there and to do business with the citizens there. Am I drawing, do you think, an accurate parallel? And are you worried, as Jeff is, that other countries may come in and try and insert themselves into that role as well?
I mean, I think you can see that parallel on one end, but also on another end, this kind of takes regulations that have been in individual European countries and makes them applicable throughout Europe. So in one sense, that can be a good thing, whereas all of these internet companies have to abide by individual regulations in France and Germany, in the UK, but now they'll hopefully be taking control of over just one regulator. But there is, I do agree with Jeff, there are huge problems with the portion of this bill that talks about the right to be forgotten. Not only would it erase or give these companies the or give users the authority to erase their data, but it would also put the onus on the websites if a third party copied this information. Right. So if Facebook, if you posted something on Facebook and you asked Facebook to take it down, and third parties had already copied it somewhere else and put it up on other websites, Facebook would still be liable. And that's a huge freedom of expression problem. And in the U.S., it would be a First Amendment problem. You just can't ask somebody to take something down like that. And you can't put the liability on Facebook for something that they have absolutely no control of. So in that sense, this regulation would be completely untenable. And I would imagine they would have to change this before it was ever implemented.
Oh, Trevor, I think that's a great point, and it goes to Section 230 in the U.S., where the reason Congress put this into the CDMA was that if we want to encourage interaction and conversation on the internet, and you make a provider of a service responsible for everything done on that service, then the service will shut down and keep anybody from doing anything. And so we saw the principle in the U.S. was that this allows the safe harbor for things like copyright, that if you're notified of a violation and you take it down, you're not liable going in, so that you can enable the great, incredible interaction that we have on the internet. And that is an exact violation of that, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we saw the same thing in the SOPA debate. The early versions of SOPA basically would have destroyed those safe harbors to where all of these websites would have to police their own content, which is literally impossible when you have 800 million users like Facebook does, or if you're YouTube where there's 60 hours of video uploaded every minute. This is not only has protected free speech on the web, but it has allowed it to thrive innovation-wise and business-wise. And so this law could really do damage to those principles.
So, Jeff, I've not read the 100-page or so document. I have read a lot of coverage about it. And one of the things I am understanding about the right to forget provisions is that, or perhaps it's the data portability or some combination of the two, that European users would have the right to go to a company like Facebook or Google and say, okay, you've had my data. I would like it back now, and I would like it off the internet. So what that would mean is that the repository would have to give over whatever it's holding, but then it would have an obligation as well to go out and find sites that had been scraping or otherwise keeping track of the data and reposting it. And it would have to go after those sites itself. Am I understanding that right?
Or it would be liable. It would be liable. It would be liable up to a worldwide, no matter where your company is, penalty of up to 2% of your global take. So imagine that in the case of Facebook and Google. That's a lot of money, and it is prohibitive. And so, what happens? Some here say, well, then don't do business in Europe. Well, of course, that's absurd. What really happens is you're exactly right, Denise, about the California analogy, that you go to the highest watermark of difficulty and regulation, the lowest watermark of liability, to figure this out. And what happens if someone buys, for example, the fire hose from Facebook? Or what happens to all of our clients on Facebook? I mean, I'm not Facebook, but Twitter, where we have those feeds and something is now suddenly to be deleted. That's an issue. The other issue here is that when I put data up and you interact with it, when you comment on it, and now my data is gone, that's an issue. If we have a transaction and you've done that, then you have some right to that information too. It's not owned by one party. The other thing we haven't raised here is there are separate regulations in the EU going on about cookies and the need to get opt-in. And there's a lot of language about the need to tick off opt-in explicitly. Well, besides the irritation factor of that going on and on and on, if the majority of consumers tend not to opt in, then that lowers the value of the web overnight. It lowers it especially for media, and what I care about is journalism, that if we can't target readers with higher value advertising, you end up with nothing but remnant low value advertising for too many readers, then we're going to take away an economic base for media and journalism, and I find that to be very dangerous.
Right. I enjoyed your discussion on Twig this week about death by 1,000 ticks. That, if the default is you have to opt into everything, it's going to quickly become very fatiguing. I agree with that. But I also, at the same time, really like the way Google Plus has implemented its sort of just-in-time privacy notices, that when you get to a point where you're about to share something that you may not have thought about, whether it's on your phone or using the web interface, you get a message at that point that says, okay,
I really
this
agree.
is
I don't
what
think
this means.
Sorry. Yeah, and I think that what happens there is that we're learning how to do it better. It's not as if, Google was bad before and good now, but both Google and Facebook have come up with a new, I don't want to say standard, but it's approaching a standard that says at the moment of sharing, you make decisions then rather than in defaults that you ignored when you signed on in the first place or can't find afterwards. And that's clearly a better and more transparent way to do it. At a level of trying to get principles of better privacy and better protection and better security, I'm all for that. In my book, Public Parts, I talk about privacy as an ethic of knowing someone else's information. And you have a responsibility that comes to you to hold it securely, to know the context of it, to not reveal it at someone's harm, and so on. And that comes from individuals and companies, too, at that level of what we're doing in terms of society and finding new norms. But I think it's too soon to regulate the net, to try to restrict it to one vision of the way we used to do things. And in fact, by the way we used to do things was no better. When I started Entertainment Weekly magazine, we sold the fact that you read the magazine with your name and address to other parties. And you had no transparency about it, no knowledge of it. That's why you suddenly got more junk mail because of it. It was far worse, I would argue, in the analog world of publishing than it is today in digital, where most of this data is anonymized.
What do you think, Trevor, of this notion of changing the default from opt-out to opt-in?
Well, it actually kind of brings up another discussion that we might be talking about later with Path and another privacy snafu that Google got itself caught in yesterday.
Right, or we can talk about it now if you'd like.
Yeah, sure. But it'll all come back in the U.S. to do not track, which is essentially the ability to opt out of receiving these cookies when you visit websites and to kind of avoid these advertisers getting all your personal information. I think the fight between opt in and opt out is an interesting one, because there are concerns on both sides. Like Jeff said, if it's opt in, then it could destroy the way these websites make money. Opt out, the do not track, for those who don't know, is kind of like the do not call list that Congress passed like about a decade ago, dealing with advertising calls on your phone to your house, where users can sign themselves up on a list and say, I don't want to receive advertising calls, and then these advertisers couldn't call them. It would work kind of the same way for advertisers, where you sign up, you opt into this list and opt out of advertising, and these cookies that are taking all your information wouldn't be able to do so. And I think we're going to see more of this debate now because of this problem that Google had yesterday with Safari and iPhone users. What essentially happened was that Safari has this privacy protection on their browser that automatically rejects third-party tracking cookies. And Google had this set up to where they kind of routed around this privacy protection. And any site that you went to with a +1, Google was taking information. Now, they say they had initially made it to be much more narrow, just so they understood that it was just users who had opted into the service and had signed into Google and realized what they were doing. But it turned out that the schematics of the whole thing made it so that advertisers were receiving a lot of information from these sites, and they were under the impression that they weren't giving this out. And again, there's also been problems with, which we're going to talk about later, with contact lists and phones automatically being downloaded to third-party apps and websites without the user's knowledge. So these problems, they're real problems, and it's a very delicate balance about how you go about solving them without destroying innovation on the web, but also protecting people's privacy.
Right.
Let's talk about the demonization of cookies, right? I think there's and this is, by the way, I would argue the fault of media and technology companies that allowed cookies to become mysterious things that sound creepy, when in fact they're a proper element in how the web works and how you get continuous service. And Google said that the reason that they did this in this temporary way, they thought it was only them doing it, was that they could you were signed into Google and could stay that way, and that this was expected. Mm-hmm. Note well that
it didn't work like that.
I know it didn't work well, and that's what happens. But I don't think that there was an evil intent to this. That the Wall Street Journal has been, I think, really damaging in this whole What They Know series of trying to demonize media and demonize advertising as a media support, just as Murdoch basically gives up advertising as a support and goes behind paywalls. And that's the business model now of News Corp, and he's pulling up the ladder behind him. And I see real problems in the tone, in the alarmist, moral panic tone of the journal's so-called coverage of privacy issues. And I think there's a real issue there. And I see I'm frozen. Let me turn off my video and turn it back on. I think part of what we have to look at is whether or not cookies are really a dangerous thing and how they're used. Now, the transparency part I absolutely agree with. Google and other companies should be much wiser about this. But what's the real harm we have to get to both ways here? Let me note that if you look at the privacy policies of the New York Times, you are required to use cookies. You can't use the service without cookies. And you know what? At some level, that is a business's right to set. Those are the business terms they set. It's like saying, you must pay us to use the service. Well, that's the terms of getting into the New York Times, is doing that. And to demonize and outlaw cookies by default, again, I fear that because I think it's potentially devastating to the economics of media and journalism.
Look, I'm not arguing for outlawing cookies by default. Certainly not. Cookies serve a purpose, some cookies. But I think the What They Know series from the Wall Street Journal, what it actually did was it shone a little transparency on this practice. And I don't think users know exactly how much information that these websites are taking from them and how prevalent it is. And how they can guess, for example, the Target situation, where Target was able to know that a girl was pregnant before her father did, essentially, just by tracking her personal habits. So I think saying that
offline. Let's note
offline. Are we talking about Target here?
Yeah. That happens offline, right, Trevor?
Yeah.
That wasn't online. That wasn't a technology issue. That was a data.
No, you're right. But I mean, the same sort of stuff happens online. They know exactly, while they may not know your name, they know exactly who you are. And I think people don't understand the depth of these cookies and how far they go. And I think the What They Know series did a good job of bringing that to the surface.
But if you mix in Target, Trevor, sorry, but you are mixing apples and kumquats a bit, because part of what's going on here is the demonization of technology, the effort to regulate technology instead of behavior. And the Target story, which was in the New York Times, a very long story that I'm guessing is a Sunday story they put out early, about how Target, using data analysis, can learn about individual customers and their habits beforehand. And the story is that if a change of habit occurs, they can know you're pregnant, and so they can start to market to you to say, hey, we've got diapers too and orange juice too.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I think they've been doing this for at least 9 years. Because when I was pregnant 9 years ago, they knew and started sending me mail and coupons for diapers and things.
And the issue there, the word often used in relation to that is creepy. And I hate that word because it really doesn't mean anything. And it's an emotional word that doesn't deal with, that we shouldn't regulate around creepiness. When people say it's creepy, what they really mean is they're surprised and unpleasantly. And the fault there is transparency to me. The issue there is companies today have to learn that when we can talk about them publicly, the price of doing something we don't like goes up. And so they're far better off not to surprise us. Holiday Inn rule. So I'm not arguing with you, Trevor, either that that's the right way to behave. But I will argue strenuously about regulating the behavior on a basis of principle rather than regulating technology on the basis of fear.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. I mean, I'm not for more internet regulation, absolutely. And you know what? And a lot of this can be solved by transparency. And that's why I think the What You Know series was good, because it shone light on these practices. And if these companies were more upfront with what they did, people would understand what's going on, and they may be able to make better decisions. And then we wouldn't have to rely on regulations.
But the problem is, Trevor, I'm sorry to interrupt. The problem with What They Know series, I apologize for doing that. I'll give you one example where I thought it reached a level of extreme absurdity.
Sure.
The demonization of RFID tags that Walmart was going to put on pants. And they quoted this woman without doing any further research on her. If you go online, the champion of anti-RFID does, honest to God, believe, I don't remember her name right now, but believe that RFID tags are the mark of the devil. And, you can see this, and you can then judge the credibility of her opposition. And the only scenario of harm given in the Wall Street Journal story was that, gosh, a thief could come and scan your garbage. And let's talk about that. Okay, fine. So what could they find out? They could find out your size 34, and they realize that yours is the house to rob because you're wearing the same size pants? What's the real harm there? It's absurd. Of this simple technology that was used to be used by Walmart to keep more 34 waist pants out on the floor. And it's perfectly sensible, but oh my God, technology is doing evil things. It knows so much. Yeah, I can look at you and tell you're fat or thin.
I tend to fall right in the middle of the two of you on this, because I, like Trevor, enjoy the What They Know series because of the information that's there that, maybe you didn't think about, or that general run-of-the-mill lay people aren't thinking about. But when they start to get too alarmist in their coverage, you just want to hold your head and cringe and say, it's not as dire as all that. I put something in our rundown for today, the What They Know mobile chart, because I thought it was fascinating. It plays in with the Path story that has been unfolding in the last week or so, of the data that is readily discernible about you simply through your use of apps on a smartphone. So, the graphic is nice. I don't think that they're being alarmist or pointing to any particular harm that does come from this data gathering. It's just simply letting people know, highlighting for them, as you go through your life, doing your thing on these devices, this is the kind of data that is being collected about you. And I think this is the reason, as people become more and more conversant with these trends, that you're seeing proposals like what is pending now in Europe. And what I'd really love to do is get back to that for a second and fold in the Path story as kind of a hypothesis For people who aren't up to speed on that, social networking mobile app called Path, which has been around for a while, I think at least a year, that is a wonderful sharing application. I just started using it. I can see why people love it. It's quite compelling. But what they were doing that was so controversial is, and they certainly aren't alone, you guys will have to remind me, didn't Facebook go through just this kind of an alarmist, kind of panicky response when it also was uploading your contacts from your iPhone to its database to hook you up with friends on Facebook? I think this was a few years ago now that we might have had the same kind of hue and cry. But the problem with Path is that, yes, indeed, they were asking your permission to access your phone's address book, and then they were uploading it to their servers to be able to do a comparison and suggest friends for you on Path, along with a whole lot of other companies who were also doing the same kind of thing. That turned out to have bad public relations ramifications. Path apologized, changed its course of business, and off you go. So let's think about Path suppose this EU directive had passed and Path had European customers. Jeff, what sort of penalties do you think that Path would be subjected to? Do you think this is the kind of little, whoops, we didn't mean to do that, there's no harm, we apologize, but could some local EU enforcement agency under the new regime then penalize them up to 2% of their revenues?
Yeah, that's the issue here. Now, let's first say that again, I think Trevor's absolutely right. Transparency is the first best shot to take for how to improve things here. And I think we had a long discussion about this over 2 weeks on This Week in Google, and the magnificent, brilliant Gina Trapani, in the end, I think had some very good suggestions about how this should be done for developers. And she was shocked at what Path had done, and even knowing it wasn't done with ill will, there's more need for transparency. And so part of the discussion is, how could Path have done it right? Path was doing this not for bad purpose. There was I don't think anyone thinks they were going to sell your data to anybody else. The main risk to you is if there was a data breach and you lost this data that actually you were in care of for others, their email addresses. What Path intended to do was to say, oh, hey, did you know Denise just joined? Because we know your email list, and we saw that she came in and she's in your email address, so we'll let you know Denise is here. You want to befriend Denise. And as a service, that makes perfect sense. The problem was that you didn't know what they were doing and how they were doing it. So the solution to that, I think, is transparency, to say, hello, Trevor, you want to find your other friends, give us your email, and you got a choice. We can erase it immediately after we do this, but then we can't tell you when Denise joins, so you got to do this every month or so. Or we can hold on to your email if you want, address book, and we can let you know when Denise joins. And I think that becomes a clear situation of the use. Now, back to the EU regulation now. You're right. There is an issue. The general principle that the EU regulations have is that companies must gather minimum data and hold for minimum time necessary for the task that is disclosed. And again, that sounds good, but I find it terribly limiting. So, for example, if, let's say, the New York Times wanted to gather data that you have vacation coming up and travel and it's behavior data or something like that, but they don't have any travel advertisers this week. In a month, they have travel advertisers. Well, if they're forced to erase that data immediately because they don't have a current need for it as expressed, then they've lost some value here. So certainly in the case of Path, I think that, yes, it would violate that minimum data for minimum time rule, and they'd be up the creek.
Right. And the other thing that these proposed new regulations are pretty paternalistic in that they definitely will alter the way that these companies do business. One of the things we haven't talked about yet is that every company above a certain size or with its core purpose being gathering and analyzing data has to have a mandatory data protection officer. And I'd like to introduce you to mine back here. He's guarding all my data for purposes of the show today. But, going in and saying what sort of officers have to be present in the company seems like it could be pretty onerous for, say, a small startup.
It's 250 employees is the benchmark.
Right.
More than 250 employees.
Right, but also isn't there a clause for if you can have fewer than that if the purpose of the company, the main core of its business, is data protection or data gathering and analysis. So I think they're trying to extend it out. Yeah,
I got to look that up again.
So it definitely seems like there's a lot that the European Union wants to be imposing on the way that people do business.
There's no doubt a cost between the paperwork and the need for compliance officers and policies and lawyers checking things. Yes, there's a fairly sizable cost to this proposed regulation.
Right, but on the one hand, when you read their introduction to it, it sounds a lot like Google's justification for unifying its privacy policy, that the 1995 rules have been implemented differently, resulting in divergences of enforcement. A single law will do away with the current fragmentation and costly administrative burdens, leading to savings for businesses of about 2.3 billion euros a year. So, applause to them for trying to unify and streamline. But I guess, when it comes down to the fine print, there are more issues at stake. What do you think, Trevor?
Well, actually, I just wanted to bring up 2 points about Path and this whole downloading context list that haven't been discussed much, both here and just in general when talking about this. Okay. First is security. A lot of these, once Path came out and said, we've been doing this and it's just industry best practice, everyone was kind of shocked because they didn't know what was happening. And then we found out all these other companies are doing it too. But a lot of these other companies, or not a lot, but at least some, have been transmitting this data over unencrypted lines in plain text. And it leaves people open to security violations to have their information stolen from them, number one. And number two, we still have to think about the government. For example, in the case of Twitter, Twitter's been doing this too, where they've been downloading contact lists to anybody using the Twitter app on your smartphone. And they store this data for 18 months. And this can come up in any sort of legal case, and even involving journalists, where Twitter data or Twitter is subpoenaed for data on specific users, like we've seen in the WikiLeaks case, where it happened to 3 volunteers of WikiLeaks, where their IP address and all their other contact information was subpoenaed by the government. Now this contact information, which Twitter has, which they hold on to for 18 months, is now also available to the authorities, just with the same subpoena. So not only would they be getting your data and your IP addresses and your contacts on Twitter, but they would also be getting it on your phone. So we not only have to think about how this kind of affects just general privacy, about what you can and cannot, or what you want and what you don't want to give to your friends and your family and advertisers. But we also have to think about what happens when this information gets stolen and what happens when the government gets their hands on it.
Right. I think that's really important, Trevor, to both points. And part of the ethic of privacy of having someone else's data is to hold it securely. Part of what the EU does demand is notification within 24 hours of a breach, which I think is very important. But I also think, by the way, that part of the fear we have of breaches is because the system downstream is broken. The fact that anyone could steal my identity with just a social security number means we've got some other problems in our system. The way I should do the fact that if they can do a transaction that easily, that's a problem that we need to fix in the transactional end. So that's not a big deal if somebody knows my social security number or knows my name and address and things like that. So I think we got a bigger systematic issue to deal with these days. The second thing you raised,
do you think that 24-hour requirement is too draconian?
No, there are some complaints about it, but no, I think that's let's put it this way, Denise. Any decent company should let you know in an hour. Right. The fact that something happened to you, that they violated your trust, not on purpose, but something bad happened, you should know that. And as soon as they can, in all practicality, tell you that. And Trevor raises another.
I could see the devil being in the details there. That perhaps they suspect something's going on, but they're not quite sure. Maybe the hacker's still in their system and they haven't quite figured out what to do about it. Just like when the hammer drops on the 24-hour ticker. Would be a critical.
No, you got a point there, Denise. What happens if I lose if I have data on my laptop which shouldn't be there, and I lose my laptop, and then oops, I found it. In the meantime, the company's suffered ill will. But I still think that in principle, the soonest practicable notice is certainly a good thing. But Trevor raises something else important, I think, here, is that government can do something with this data. And government fancies itself the best protector of privacy. But I argue that it is the worst enemy of privacy because it can do something with our information that others can't. It has the power of the law and jail and taxation and the military, and it has secret powers over us. In Canada right now, there's a big fight over a bill proposed to require that any mobile operator hand over all kinds of data about you without warrants. And this is all under the guise of child predators and child porn. Same within Australia, they're trying to filter all content just to get to child porn. And this is another case where we're trying to regulate all behavior. We're trying to get to one behavior, but by regulating technology, we regulate all behaviors. We're trying to restrict one thing that shouldn't be free, child porn, but we potentially, by regulating technology, regulate all freedoms. And that's an issue. It's especially an issue in the hands of government. And again, we have to talk about the architecture of the net. That if we allow a government we like to do this, Canada, hey, they're nice. Anybody else can do the same thing if the architecture is set up that way. And there are other governments we certainly don't want doing this, where there are people who are at risk for being whistleblowers or dissidents.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that Canada law is really scary. And you're right, they changed the name of it so to actually scare people into supporting it by saying it was for child pornography. But of course, it deals with any user. It they don't have to be using child pornography, obviously, and it could be for any crime. And it doesn't even require a warrant for this information. And you know what? The same exact bill is coming down the pipe in the U.S. I think it's called H.R. 1981, and it was written by Lamar Smith of Texas, who you may remember is the author of SOPA. And it is essentially a data retention bill where all websites will have to keep information on you for a year. And this is under the guise of child pornography, saying that the government needs to better police the internet for this kind of behavior. But again, it won't just apply to people or law enforcement agents who are investigating child pornography. It can be used for any crime, and it infringes on users' privacy. And once these laws start getting passed in one country, like you said, in Canada, they'll start being passed in other countries. And if the U.S. passes it, then that will give any other country license to pass this law as well.
Exactly.
So, Trevor, let's talk about European Parliament and spy tech. What were you doing there, and how do you think it went?
Sure. This is kind of the privacy, the worst case scenario for privacy. In a lot of Middle Eastern countries, for example, Tunisia, Egypt, before the revolution, they have been buying this sophisticated technology to spy on their citizens from Western technology companies in the U.S. and the EU. And this technology, which is in some cases used by governments all over the world, but for at least lawful purposes here in the U.S. and the EU, we at least have some laws that prevent law enforcement's unfettered use of this technology. But basically what it does is it can track your every move and read your every email and read your every text and record all your phone calls. It could even change emails en route when you send it to a recipient. So if you hit the send button and you think you're saying something, in Tunisia, there was a lot of cases of the government going in, changing your email, and then sending it on to its final destination. And you can imagine the pain that causes.
I'm sorry, but at some level, that's just funny. Somebody editing your email. Maybe I need that. I don't know. I'm joking. Can they read my email and put it in priority inbox too? That'd be a great service.
Well, unfortunately, this leads to people freaking out to the point where they don't even know who they're talking to. This technology can also turn on your webcam without you knowing. It can turn on the microphone in your phone without you knowing.
Jesus.
Turn your phone into a GPS tracking device where on the big screen they have maps of you and your contacts, where you're standing, and it can basically track you in real time. And so they're using all this technology to track human rights workers, to track journalists, and to track democratic activists. And
I want to see a what they know story on this soon.
Yeah, actually, you know what? The Wall Street Journal is one of the only people who are covering it. They have another series called Censorship Inc., which actually a few of the reporters from the What They Know series have been reporting on it. And them and Bloomberg are really the only ones that have been investigating this. And this industry is $5 billion, and it's growing every year. They have these situations called, or these trade shows called wiretappers balls, where all of these companies show up, and then the Mideast countries like Saudi Arabia and Bahrain and Yemen and Egypt and Tunisia and Iran and Syria all come to these trade shows and try to buy this technology, which is then used by its intelligence agents to track down dissidents and arrest them and eventually torture them. In Bahrain, there is dozens of examples of people being tortured, and while they're being tortured, they're being read transcripts of their text messages asking them questions about what they were doing. So this industry is completely unregulated to the point where these companies can sell this technology to dictators, and these dictators can use it for whatever they want. And it's becoming a real problem for human rights in about a dozen countries in the Mideast and North Africa. So we would like to see something done about this, obviously, because it affects people's, not only their free speech rights and their privacy rights in these countries where there are no laws to protect them, but it could end up affecting their very lives because they're being tortured and sometimes killed over this.
Trevor, are there other, we've had this discussion when it came to supplying Firewall of China equipment technology. What is the general law, both of you, around aiding and abetting, bad guys, and how much does the kind of stuff you just described, Trevor, which all is frightening and sobering, fall under existing law, and how much is where does it stand in terms of under principle regulation of supporting criminals and rogue elements and such?
Yeah. Well, see, it's really, this is where it gets really complicated for regulators and lawmakers to make laws about this. Because for example, first we'll take like Syria and Iran. There are export restrictions in the US and the EU on Syria and Iran to get certain types of technology. But unfortunately, this technology, the way they define it under the law, is so tough to define that it ends up, it's dual use technologies to the point where in Syria, so we ban exports to Syria, but at the same time, the activists in Syria can't access Google Chrome or Google Earth because browsers have surveillance capabilities, like we were talking about before. They can find your IP address. So a lot of times these export restrictions are overbroad to the point where it ends up hurting the activists because they can't get the technology they need to use to communicate. And then these countries can get around these restrictions by getting the companies to sell to third parties and then smuggling the technology in. So it's a very complicated problem. And so we don't want to overregulate, like we were talking about before. Mm-hmm. Overregulation can end up having more harm done than good. So what we ended up proposing to the EU Parliament was, instead of regulating the technology, regulate the customers of the technology and make these companies, maybe through incentives like government contracts, where these companies can't do business in Europe and the US unless they implement a robust human rights policy, to the point where they have to investigate not only their initial customers, but where their technology ends up in the end, so it can kind of stop this third party problem. Because even if we were able to perfect definitions of technology and stop it from going to Syria and Iran, a lot of the worst cases of torture happened in Bahrain, where there was over 140 documented allegations in the last year of the government torturing people. And a lot of them, like I said, were being read their text messages. And Bahrain is an ally of the United States. We have a military base there. We give them military aid. So we're never going to see sanctions against Bahrain. So by having companies kind of be incentivized to implement these human rights policies may be a better solution, because that way it can cover all the countries, and it wouldn't overregulate the technology.
Right. So it does follow that principle. You're regulating the behavior of tyrants over-regulating the technology as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like
Because
that.
there's just so many problems that we've seen with past regulations where they're written broadly. And in the U.S., it works like there's two, Commerce and Treasury do regulations. So they write these broad regulations, and then companies go and ask for exemptions to them so they can export communications tools that activists may use. But the process is slow, and it's complicated because there's two agencies doing it, so they don't never really know if they have the authority to send this stuff out or they don't, so they err on the side of caution. And so a lot of basic communication tools are being lost for people who really need them, the organizers, the democratic activists, the journalists. So, we want to see a situation where they can get all of what they need, but these companies are sort of forced to refrain from selling the technology to people who would use it to commit human rights violations.
Trevor, is there kind of a parallel here to arms dealers, who also have a technology that you don't want to fall into the wrong or irresponsible hands? Is that the kind of argument that's being advanced for regulation?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, this technology in the wrong hands can often in these days be more powerful than weapons. Because as we've seen over the last year in the Arab Spring, technology played a vital role in organizing people. It allowed these protests to proliferate very fast. And this technology would allow the government to basically, so say you were in Egypt a year ago, this technology would have allowed them to find the people organizing these protests and jail them before they ever could have gotten off the ground. And, we're seeing that in Iran right now. In Iran, even though there are export restrictions on them, they have technology from many U.S. companies and EU companies that track people on the internet and their mobile device. That in Iran right now, your cell phone is so useless that you should. It's recommended that they actually just leave it at home if they're ever to go to a protest. Shutting it off isn't enough, because it can be turned on remotely and you can be listened to on your microphone and you can be tracked by GPS. So it's basically turned mobile devices into useless objects for activists and can actually end up hurting them. So it's really scary.
Let me ask a question. Is that built? Are you saying that's built into all phones as they exist, or it's built into phones that are sold there under order of government, or how does that extra capability there?
Like for example, Ericsson, who is a cellular provider in Europe, manufactures equipment for the Iranian government that allows them this capability. I'm actually not sure if it's specially built mobile phones, but I'm pretty sure they have the capability to just do this through software and malware. And spyware, where once they infect the device, that they have total control over it. So this isn't a cell phone example, but say your computer. There's a company called Finfisher, which advertises to not just government and law enforcement, but intelligence services, that they can trick users into downloading a update to a popular program like iTunes or Adobe Flash. So the same update that you see every couple months on your computer that Apple sends you will pop up on your screen, and instead of being Apple, it will be Finfisher, and you will have no idea. And once you download it, they will have access to not only your emails and your IMs and everything online, but it will also have access to things that are offline. They're just on your computer that you never put online. And it can also turn on your webcam and track your keystrokes. So it's kind of like vicious or malicious software and malware that basically online criminals use to steal banking information. This is the technology that's being sold to governments in mass quantities so that they can spy on their citizens.
Well, I want to get in a minute here to talking about the United States and surveillance technologies. You alluded to that a moment ago, Trevor. And we also have stories about Facebook and Netflix and how they are using data. But before we get to that, I want to thank our sponsor for this episode of This Week in Law, which is Netflix. I think you know this by now, but if you don't, Netflix streams thousands of TV episodes and movies directly to you instantly, which means you save time, money, and hassle. There are several easy ways to instantly access streaming movies and TV shows with Netflix. You can watch Netflix movies and TV shows on your Mac or PC or iPad. That iPad app comes in very handy. You can watch on your iPhone and some Android phones too. If you have a gaming console, an Xbox 360, a PS3, or a Nintendo Wii, you can watch Netflix right on your TV, and you can do that too with an Apple TV or any number of other set-top boxes that are inexpensive and easy to use. With Netflix, you can watch movies and TV shows instantly using any of these devices. And this is so key in my family, you can begin watching a movie or show on one device and then finish on a different one. Whichever way you choose to access Netflix, you can watch as many movies and TV shows as you want, anytime you want, and you can cancel anytime. So try it today for 30 days, absolutely free. Go to netflix.com/twit. When you use that code, it lets them know that we sent you there. We greatly appreciate that. And we greatly appreciate Netflix's support of This Week in Law. Okay, Trevor, we've been talking about how various authoritarian regimes may be monitoring their citizens. The U.S. does its own share of monitoring, but as you said, we have laws in place that are supposed to be a check and balance on that. There's a FOIA, a Freedom of Information Act request seeking stats on what the Justice Department has been up to. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this kind of pertains to what we were talking about before with contact lists. So the Justice Department has many ways to get information from people via subpoena or some other forms of wiretap, let's call it, even though it's not necessarily a wiretap. So the telephone numbers you dial or the phone calls you receive or the IP addresses of the websites you visit can be received through things called pen registers or trap and trace subpoenas. So the government is supposed to, by law, report this information to Congress every year. How many of these they're seeking, and at what frequency. Yet there was a Freedom of Information Act request by security researcher Chris Sagoyan, which he found out that for the last 10 years, basically, the Justice Department just has stopped reporting this information to Congress, and that Congress hasn't really even asked them for it or cared. So the ACLU is suing for this information, first of all. And it also brings up other questions about kind of how safe our data is when it comes to the government. And a big part of this is the rights of journalists, which I'm sure Jeff has some comments on too. There have been 6 cases of leakers from the government that have been prosecuted under President Obama in the last 3 years. And that's more than all of the other presidents combined. And the main reason for this is technology. It has become much easier for the government to get email contact lists of both the leakers and journalists. And it has led to what the New York Times has called a high-tech war on leaks. Now, there is, there's a comment at the end of the article that talks about how there's an NSA member that is sitting on a panel talking about how, well, we don't need to subpoena journalists to testify anymore because we can just read their email contact list without them knowing. And so in one sense, it's very scary for journalists, and it chills the rights of the free press. And on the other hand, it's scary for just everyday citizens who are being subpoenaed with these trap and trace and pen registers to the point where they don't know if they're being surveilled. And, we don't know just the raw numbers about how many people are being surveilled in general.
So let's break this down, Trevor. As far as the leakers go, do you said that we've prosecuted during the Obama administration more people than in the entire history of presidents before President Obama?
Yeah, it's a pretty amazing stat considering that Obama actually ran on protecting whistleblowers and making sure that information that was potentially illegal or even embarrassing in the government, if it got out to the press and it was of public interest, that he would protect them. But like I said, there's been 6 prosecutions since Obama took office. Before that, there was only 2 in the history, in the modern history of the U.S. One was Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers, whose case eventually got thrown out. And then there was just one minor case in the 1980s where somebody leaked information from the Navy to a Navy magazine.
How much spy tech do you think is involved in all this? Is the U.S. doing what you don't want to have happen abroad?
I mean, I don't. It's tough to compare the two situations because there are, in the Mideast you have hundreds of activists who are basically just trying to organize democratic protests, and they face arrest and torture on a massive scale because of this. And they have all of their personal information is just on a huge flat screen TV in front of intelligence agents. In the U.S. it's more subtle. The privacy laws as far as subpoenas versus warrants go, with electronic information versus analog information like phone calls and letters, is weakened. So in some cases where the authorities would need a warrant and probable cause to get, your letters that you're sending in the mail, they don't need that same warrant for emails. So it allows the government to get this information easier for sure. And that has led to a lot more leakers being caught, essentially giving information to journalists that, is in the public interest. For example, the latest case was a former CIA officer who had been talking to the New York Times, allegedly, and ABC News about torture. And we have not seen in the last few years any prosecutions for actual torture or the people who organized the torture during the Bush administration. But now we find out that somebody's being indicted for talking to the press about what happened. So you can kind of see the disconnect with the rule of law and the priorities of the Obama administration. And this will have an effect on journalism. When people are too afraid to speak up, then we won't know as much. And given the secrecy in government in general, this can be a real problem. And we can see it right now with the situation in Iran, where classified information may leak out to newspapers, which is favorable to the government, which is the message that they want everybody to hear. And if leakers and whistleblowers inside the government are too afraid to speak up about truthful information that they know about that would be in the public interest, it could have real consequences. And the perfect example of that is the war in Iraq, where the Bush administration was leaking information it wanted about weapons of mass destruction that didn't exist, and we didn't get the other side of the story. So by prosecuting leakers and using kind of this technology against them could cause huge problems, not just for whistleblowers, but for the nation.
Yeah. I know you don't know the answer to this question, but I'm interested in your opinion. How does the Department of Justice just drop the ball on its compliance obligations so as to necessitate a Freedom of Information Act request about what it's been doing? I mean, presumably they're getting all the warrants and jumping through all the safeguards and hoops they're supposed to, as you say, for doing this kind of surveillance. But, how do they just not
I mean, that's a great question. I have no idea how they haven't complied. I guess, what part of the reason is Congress probably wasn't forcing them to and kind of just dropped the ball themselves. And, it's not just the Justice Department. Congress has some responsibility here as well. They can strengthen protections for emails and other electronic information to where a warrant should be required, just like it is for letters and just like it is for phone calls. Email is our primary form of communication. The post office is running ads right now because no one's sending letters anymore. That's because everybody's using email. And it's the same thing, and it should be protected with the same protections that letters have been for centuries.
Yeah,
I think that's way right, Trevor. Yeah, I think Trevor's especially right on the last, right in all of that, but I think especially the last point raises the discussion up again, once again, to principles. Should personal communication be protected? Letters were the definition of personal protection before we had telephones and email. And the problem was we still define it in the law as letters. and only the USPS then has basically a monopoly on that kind of constitutional protection. That's absurd on its face. So the protection should be done at a level of principle, and then the transparency should be done at a level of principle. The real issue here is that government, as I like to say it, is secret by default and open by force. Whether that force is reporters or FOIAs or WikiLeaks, that's not the way government should operate today. Trevor, a very ignorant question, but could everything you've just talked about have had any impact on an American leaking to, let's say, WikiLeaks?
Oh, I think absolutely. It doesn't even have to be an American because
I'd just be within the country, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like with the three people, the three WikiLeaks volunteers, when their information was subpoenaed from Twitter and probably Google. Two of them didn't live in the United States, and one was even a member of Icelandic Parliament.
Well, I guess I'm asking almost a more technical question. The means of communications that someone used to WikiLeaks, that they presume to be secure and secret, and WikiLeaks is then the protector of that, is that last mile from the leaker to WikiLeaks subject to more surveillance than we knew?
Oh, I mean, obviously it would be hard to say for sure, but I think we can definitely venture a guess that this type of communication is very much less secure than the normal source-reporter relationship, where people used to, the famous scene in All the President's Men, where you meet in a darkened parking garage and hand off a envelope full of information. And what's funny is, in the New York Times article that talked about this high-tech war on leaks, they actually quoted a member of the Department of Justice that stated, if you want to leak something, you should meet the reporter in person, put it in an envelope, and walk away quickly, because they have access to the information now to where they can tell, even if they can't get the contents of your email, by knowing your contacts and who you are emailing and when you are emailing them, they can make a pretty good guess as to who a leaker is in a certain situation in a certain story. And it goes back to the Twitter situation with the contact lists. If they can get the contact list of your email and then the contact list of your phone with the same subpoena, then they'll have even more information to make these judgments. And like the NSA person on the panel said, they might not even need the reporter to testify anymore in these leak trials, because they have all this information from the reporter anyways without his knowledge.
So guys, let's talk about some lawsuits, one of which is resolved, one is pending, and one is yet to be filed, merely a specter of a lawsuit at this point. A couple of them relate squarely to what we've been talking about today on the show. Netflix, we learned in its latest SEC filing, has settled a claim with some of its customers. It settled the claim for $9 million. The suit was filed last March, and it was concerning how long they were keeping video viewing data. We have a law in the United States called the Video Privacy Protection Act, which requires the destruction of rental records within a year of an account's termination. Over at The Hollywood Reporter, Eric Gardner had good coverage of this story. So apparently Netflix was hanging on to that data for longer than allowed. Actually, they haven't admitted any liability, so we don't know exactly how long they were hanging on to it, but it was alleged that they were. And to make this go away, without admitting liability, they have paid these people $9 million, and the lawsuit has been resolved. I suppose, Jeff, that if these had been Europeans and the new proposals had been enacted, it could have been a fee of a heck of a lot more than $9 million. So any thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's also, as I understand it, Denise, correct me if I'm wrong, this is about that specific case. There was the earlier Netflix case where, of course, they did the X Prize and put out data. This is not related to that, right?
No, not related to that.
But just to raise that as an illustration too, as you remember, just for background, Netflix did an X Prize. If the various competitors could improve the accuracy of Netflix recommending movies to you by N%, then they would have $1 million and teams did win. But the problem came out afterwards that Netflix believed they were anonymizing the data. They did everything appropriate to anonymize the data, but then some clever hack comes along to say, aha, if I put this and this and this together, I can see that you rented Ishtar, and shame on you. And I make light, but of course, just as with libraries, we don't want our consumption to necessarily be revealed against our will, and so Netflix had to stop the X Prize. So go back now to your question with Europe. Even in that kind of case where it's, they thought that they were doing everything not to have that kind of breach happen, if they are liable to that extent, what does that do to the normal course of liability in running your business? That there could be things that you do in good faith to every possible presently known structure, and then afterwards you find out, oops. Now, we don't want a lot of oopses in society, but again, one could argue the worst that happens, considering that Netflix doesn't release, I don't think, X-rated stuff, is that you watched Ishtar. Is that worth 2% of your global take? Is that the kind of liability that we're opening up here with this regulation? Worst case to worst case.
Yeah, exactly. Trevor, what do you think about Netflix's point? It really wouldn't be relevant in this lawsuit, but they are lobbying to change the Video Privacy Protection Act. They think it's out of date and that they should be able to retain this data for longer and do profitable things with it. What's your take on that?
Yeah, they're actually trying to carve out kind of a Netflix exception to the VPPA, which would allow them to do this and kind of allow them to go on Facebook and have people see their viewing habits more easily. And, I do agree with Jeff, although I think I may be more of a privacy advocate than he is. Just that in the general, overregulation of this kind of thing is more problematic and will cause more problems than it will actually solve. Like we've been saying all day, you can see this in pretty much every scenario, with whether it's the free speech problems with the right to be forgotten, or putting undue burdens on these companies where they're being punished for something that may have been a mistake. Now, whether it's a real mistake or it's just a mistake that, in quotes, that they kind of owned up to after the fact that they got caught is another story. But I think by pushing these draconian punishments on these companies may end up doing more harm than good in the end.
Okay, let's talk about
privacy advocates, Trevor.
I think we all are. It's just a question of implementation where people begin to disagree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like we've been talking about before, transparency can do a lot. And when people know what they're giving up, then they may be more careful. And just the knowledge of having this information about where all their personal information is going can go a long way. And often regulations won't be needed when that happens. And you can see this across the spectrum. Just even talking about technology that's being used by these Mideast countries, this surveillance technology, just by knowing that these companies exist and knowing that they're selling this technology can force change. For example, there's a company called AreaSpa that was selling this technology to Syria, and when Bloomberg reported on it, protests sprung up outside their office, and they were forced to halt construction. So transparency can go a long way in just making people aware of what they're giving up, and can force change by itself. And a lot of times we don't need regulations.
Okay, so let's talk about the pending lawsuit. This one involves Facebook. And I bring it up today, and it goes exactly to what you were just saying, Trevor, about people being adequately informed and there being sufficient transparency between companies and people about their data and how their data is being used. This case goes right to that. It's about sponsored stories on Facebook. And the reason I bring it up is because it's come up at least twice on the TWiT network in the last week. Two of the most tech and social network savvy people I personally know, Leo Laporte and Robert Scoble, were stunned and surprised on TWiT last week. They were discussing this to learn that if Robert had liked a book, it was going to show up perhaps as a sponsored story, otherwise looking very much like an ad in the sidebar of Leo's Facebook page. And yes, indeed, this is something Facebook has been doing for some time. They have a whole FAQ in their help center about sponsored stories. And what they say sponsored stories are, and I'm quoting, posts from your friends, or pages on Facebook that a business, organization, or individual has paid to highlight, so there's a better chance you'll see them. They are regular stories that a friend or page you're connected to has shared with you. So I'm wondering about the transparency of that statement, because how this actually gets effectuated is not like a regular story. These things show up looking very much like ads. They pop up in that same space where the ads appear, and it looks like, here's your friend, Robert in this case, recommending that you go out and buy this particular thing that they've liked, or that you have some other economic relationship to it. So there is a lawsuit about this. It's pending in California, and it has survived a motion to dismiss by Facebook. And the assertions in this lawsuit are that, hey, Facebook, you are using my name and likeness in a way that I have not authorized.
For commercial purposes.
Right, for commercial purposes. So this is winding through the courts and has survived at least one hurdle. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes, because just looking through the very basic information that Facebook is providing users about this, I think they have made it very confusing, and that you cannot opt out of it. Speaking of death by 1,000 ticks, one of the FAQ points is you can't opt out of being featured in sponsored stories, but you can visit your activity log to make sure that only the people you want to share with can see them. So I do think that this is a potential problem for Facebook. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I think it is too. If I want to, if I have a journalistic product and I want to put your picture in it in a journalistic context, I have a right to do that. If I want to advertise that publication and use your picture in it, I can't do that without having your permission. I can't use your likeness and name to advertise my thing unless you've agreed to that. That's the basic principle of law here. Tell me if I'm wrong, counselor. But so I think it stands here too, that your name and likeness are being used to advertise something, and it's against your knowledge. We go back to Facebook's Beacon program, where they were going to just share the fact that you bought something with someone else and then advertise around that. And when I interviewed Zuckerberg for Public Parts, he said it was a mistake, it was wrong. And I said, well, but I still think there was something there in a future of marketing in terms of knowing what your friends buy does have value. He said, no, it's never coming back, it's wrong. Well, in a sense, they brought it back in a worse form with this.
Yeah, I agree. Trevor, any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, a couple thoughts. It's especially about the arguments that Facebook is making in court. One is that this is they're trying to use the newsworthy exceptions to the rights of publicity. So what essentially they're saying is the First Amendment protects them because it's newsworthy that you like a certain product, which is a little. I mean, it's a pretty big twist of the law, considering. There would be no such thing as to right to publicity if this were true. You could take a picture of any sort of celebrity, say Mark Zuckerberg drinking a Pepsi, and then making a commercial around his likeness because he happened to have it in his hand, or he likes to drink it. And so I think there is a very it's a very interesting argument that would essentially destroy the rights to publicity. But then there's also the public figure argument. Facebook argued, and I'd love to hear Jeff's thoughts on this, given his book title. But Facebook is essentially arguing that everybody using Facebook is a public figure in the eyes of all of their friends and who they're connected to. And so I think this argument would also have larger implications, given that public figures are subject to separate standards for libel suits, for example. So they still have
rights of publicity, though. Simply asserting that someone is a public figure doesn't mean that they can't sue you for misappropriating their name and likeness, correct?
Oh, right, absolutely. But I'm just saying, arguing that that users are public figures in general may have implications outside of rights of publicity and the specific suit.
Oh, that makes
And
my mind just spin, Trevor. Yes.
I know. Yeah, and I'm wondering what you think about the idea of expanding the definition of public figure in the legal sense.
Well, it does come to the definition of public. I argued that when Facebook, messed up, and it did mess up in various privacy kerfuffles by making the data that we had there more and more public, and there have been some great illustrations of that Facebook, I argue, confused the notion of a public and the public, right? And a public is, Facebook is a tool to put together publics, right? Here's my public from school, my public from friends. When I tell you were both my TWiL friends, right? And you're my TWiL public. And if I tell just you something, we'll imagine no one else is watching right now. It is public to that extent, right? And what happens to it, again, is your responsibility. You may spread it, you may not. But it's no longer just mine. It's no longer just my head. So in a sense, yes, that is a public. But the problem Facebook got into is that when they then opened things up that you thought you were saying to a public you trusted and had reason to trust, that's different from, sorry, there goes the video again. That's different from sharing with the whole world. And it's like being in high school and you found out that you were talking next to an open mic on the PA system as you declared love for your girlfriend. And so, I think Facebook is right only to the extent of an intellectual curiosity with the idea of saying that there is a larger notion of publics. But that is not the same as saying, I think, that you are a public figure in the sense that you are known broadly with celebrity.
Yeah, the place where this could really wind up having an impact is in defamation law, where it's difficult to sue.
There too, right,
it's
Denise.
difficult to get redress if you're considered a public figure.
But there the issue becomes, as Susan Crawford has said, just speaking theoretically, that the idea that I forget her exact wording, but it was that we need to reconsider defamation libel law because there is a means of response that didn't exist before,
right?
And so at least it mitigates the damage potentially of defamation.
Yeah, and I think there is something to this argument. I mean, we can sit here and sort of worry and hand-wring about the ramifications, but they've got a point. We're all a lot more public than we used to be in varying
Trevor,
degrees.
if there's anything written about that, can you email me? That was a fascinating thing to bring up.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so let's talk quickly about the lawsuit yet to come. I feel like this is, an episode of the Christmas Carol making its way into TWiL here today. And that is lots of people upset, but I don't believe anything has been filed yet. Chat room, correct me if I'm wrong, about AT&T throttling its unlimited users. Folks who signed up for and had, their terms of service say that, hey, we're going to offer you an unlimited plan an unlimited data plan if you sign up and pay this certain amount or if you sign up at this time. And then, of course, the unlimited plans have gone away, but AT&T's way of nudging people away from those plans who they apparently would now rather not have people have them is to, if you've used a certain amount of data, they say they're sending you a text message, at least to give you some warning. I've seen people saying, no, I never got a text message, but they're going to slow you down to a crawl. And I'm thinking that somebody somewhere is going to bring a class action suit about this because it's not what they signed up for. Trevor, what do you think?
Yeah, so actually about a month ago, I got one of these text messages. I was told, but it said something totally different than what it said in the news reports. It said I was in the top 5% of the data users, and that they sent me to a link to give me tips on how I could reduce my usage. So they didn't warn me that they were going to throttle me, thank goodness. And I certainly hope they don't. But I definitely think it is fairly deceptive that they had allowed old iPhone users to keep this unlimited plan, and now they're using, a technicality in the language of the contract to say, we're gonna keep you on the unlimited plan, but we're just going to slow down your use. And so it kind of completely ruins the whole purpose of using the internet on your phone when none of these pages can load. There's reports of people not being able to access simple web pages where they're literally taking hours to load, or they can't even get access to their email. So I think this problem isn't going to go away if they're going to continue to do this. You know, there's the article about Fox News anchor Shepard Smith complaining loudly about this, saying that this isn't what he signed up for, and it's deceptive of AT&T to do this. And, you know, there's so many iPhone users, so many early adopters that had signed up for this unlimited plan, that I don't think this is going to go away anytime soon.
Yeah. Jeff, any thoughts? We need to wrap, but any quick thoughts on this?
I was trying to look up the answer to this is competition. The answer to this is more white space. Now, to pay for the current continued tax relief story in the Times today about selling bandwidth and the spectrum, rather. And we can discuss the efficacy of that to pay a short-term bill with a long-term asset. But nonetheless, part of the legislation that's in there is to open up the white spaces for Wi-Fi on steroids, as Google puts it. And I think that's the only solution to all of this issue is to try to find more competition. Now, Susan Crawford, to quote her again, would say, no, there's only so much possibility of competition, and what we need is government-supported services to guarantee openness. One way or the other, we're getting screwed.
There's the theme for the show. On that note, we have a couple of resources and a tip of the week for you. The first of the resources is Viviane Reding, Vice President of the European Commission, explaining the proposed data protection reforms. It's the text of her speech from January 22nd. It's a long URL, so I'll stick it in our discussion points. You can look it up yourself there, which is at delicious.com/thisweekinlaw/149. And for all of you, I keep referring back to this as I was prepping for the show today, who are sort of unclear perhaps on the difference between the European Commission, the European Parliament, the European Council. Wikipedia does a great job of breaking all that down and saying who's who and who does what. So I put in a link to the Wikipedia page on that too. Trevor, you probably had to sort all that out for your trip.
Forever to figure it out. I still don't even know if I know.
All right. Well, so for a little help, Wikipedia is providing some assistance. Then our tip of the week is, if you are Vivo, this comes to us via Jason Kincaid at TechCrunch, don't show a pirated stream of an NFL game at your Sundance Film Festival party, which apparently is what Vivo was doing. They have, washed their hands of the situation and say the party planners were not under their direct control, what have you. But I encourage everyone to go read Jason Kincaid's article at TechCrunch about this, because it's pretty funny, and it's sort of, right hand doesn't know what left is doing. So know what your hands are doing. And thank you, Fred von Lohen, for highlighting that on Google+. That made me giggle. Guys, this show has made me think and laugh and ponder big issues, as I knew that it would when I invited you both on. So thank you so much for joining me today. Jeff, always a pleasure to have you on TWiL.
Thank you. It's an honor to be on with both of you. And Trevor, always good to see you as well. Thanks.
The pleasure was all ours. Of course, you can find Jeff. He's on Twitter at Jeff Jarvis, and his great blog, Buzz Machine, is always full of wonderful information and insights. And of course, I'm sure you're all already tuning in to This Week in Google with Jeff, Gina, and Leo, which is part of my Wednesday afternoon programming every week. So thanks a lot, Jeff.
Thank you.
Trevor, great to have you back on the show. I'm glad you've returned safely from your travels.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun to be on. It was great talking to you, Jeff. It was really fun.
Good. We'll get you back on again soon. In the meantime, folks can find Trevor at WL Legal over on the Twitter. Both of them are on Google+, by the way. As is TWiL. We've got our Google+ page, our Facebook page. Do look us up there between the shows. Give us story suggestions and comments. And you can email me. I'm Denise at twit.tv. Hopefully we'll see you next week and every Friday at 11 a.m. Pacific when we record the show. We love having you tune in and join us live, or get the show after the fact in iTunes, or whatever means of consuming podcasts is your favorite. And until next time, this has been This Week in Law. We've loved having you. Take care.